Today's historical documentary looks at the life of Joan of Navarre, Queen consort and second wife to the English Plantagenet monarch, Henry IV. Joan was born in the city on Pamplona in 1368. At that time, Pamplona was in the Kingdom of Navarre, which is now in the northeast of modern-day Spain. Joan was the ninth and last-born child of King Charles II of Navarre. Her mother was Joan of Valois, whose father was King John II of France. Joan's father would earn the nickname Charles the Bad. This was down to his consistent switching of support for both sides during the 100 Years' War. Joan's oldest brother and second-born child to her parents, would become King Charles III of Navarre. Very little is known of Joan's childhood. Undoubtedly, though, as a princess of a kingdom in Europe, she would be raised with the expectations to marry into one of the major royal families in Europe. In doing so, it would create a strong political alliance for her parents' kingdom. It could be expected that she would be taught the art of diplomacy and learn various European languages including French and Latin. Whether she would learn English at this stage is unknown. Around 1380, it is believed that she was betrothed in marriage to Henry, Prince of Asturias. Henry was the heir to throne of Castile at this time. Nothing though became of this match, more than likely, due to her father, who was notorious for switching alliances. Eventually Joan would marry John IV, Duke of Brittany. Brittany in 1380 was an independent kingdom from France, which was consistently trying to assert its authority in the area. A match between Brittany and Navarre would suit both kingdoms in defending themselves from their aggressive neighbor. In 1386 Joan married John IV, Duke of Brittany, and became the Duchess of Brittany. Joan would be the third wife of John IV. She would also be the only wife who would bear children for him, including the two heirs to the Dukedom of Brittany, John V and Arthur III. In total they would have 9 children together. 4 boys and 5 girls, although the first 2 children and girls born would not survive infancy. During her marriage to John, they would host Henry Bolingbroke, who had been exiled from England by his cousin, Richard II. It is believed during this time that Joan and Henry would develop a deep friendship for each other. At the age of around 31, in 1399, Joan's husband John would die at the age of 59. This would leave Joan acting as regent to her oldest son as the Duke of Brittany. John would be only around 9 or 10 years old at the time, and would require his mother to act and coach him to take over the dukedom. At around the same time, Henry Bolingbroke would usurp his cousin, Richard II, as King of England. Henry would become Henry IV. At some point after this date, Henry, who had now been a widow since the death of his first wife, Henry would pursue Joan to become both his wife and queen. The match was a personal choice made by Henry and not one made for a political alliance. Joan was initially very hesitant to accept Henry's proposal. Not because she had any dislike to him, but rather she wanted to stay in Brittany to act as regent to her son and give stability to the dukedom. Eventually, though, she would agree to marry Henry. But not before signing a treaty with the Duke of Burgundy, who would replace her as regent to her son and promise not to interfere in the laws, customs and traditions of Brittany. Joan would marry Henry on the 7th of February 1403 at Winchester Cathedral. 19 days later, on the 26th of February 1403, she would enter London, where she would be coronated as consort Queen of England. When she came to England, Joan would bring with her a Breton entourage which included 2 of her own daughters. The English Parliament, which was very sensitive at the time due to the circumstances of how Henry IV had claimed the throne, would take exception to Joan's court and would exile them from the country. There would be no surviving children in the marriage of Henry IV and Joan of Navarre, although in the same year of their marriage. There would be no surviving children in the marriage of Henry IV and Joan of Navarre, although in the same year of their marriage. In 1406, 3 years after his arrival in England, her 2 daughters who travelled with her, would be ordered to return to Brittany on the order of Joan's son, John V of Brittany. Both Margaret and Blanche were undoubtedly recalled to Brittany as their older brother had found them political matches in marriage, as both were wed the following year. In 1419, Joan's husband, Henry IV, died on the 20th of March in the Jerusalem house, another name for the abbot's house at Westminster Abbey. Henry IV's oldest son would inherit throne and be coronated Henry V. Joan always had a very good relationship with all her second husband's children, especially Henry. Henry would look after his stepmother initially, allowing her the use of several royal castles, including Windsor Castle. The relationship, though, that Joan had with her stepson and king would soon turn sour. On the 25th of October 1415, Joan's second, Arthur, was part of the French army at the Battle of Agincourt. During the battle, Arthur was wounded and captured by the English forces led by Joan's stepson, Henry V. Henry brought Arthur back to England as a hostage. On their return, Joan would petition Henry for her son's release, which Henry refused. Eventually, Arthur would be released in 1420 in order to help persuade his from John, Duke of Brittany, to sign the Treaty of Troyes. Later, Arthur would be created as the Duke of Touraine by the English, but was deprived of any power. Joan's relationship with Henry V would completely break down in 1419. Joan's personal confessor, Friar Randolph, went to Parliament and accused Joan of being a witch and had plotted to assassinate the king. As a result, Joan was imprisoned at Pevensey Castle near modern-day Eastbourne in West Sussex, and all of her estates and properties were confiscated. Joan, though, was never formally charged for being a witch. A punishment with normally a death sentence by being burnt at the stake. Most likely the reason for imprisonment and punishment was to grab all of her assets rather than the belief that she was an actual witch. Joan's imprisonment, though, was one of luxury, being kept in the relative comfort of the keep at Pevensey and still allowed to keep her servants and receive guests. After 3 months, Joan was moved to Leeds Castle in Kent, where she would see out the rest of her imprisonment in the same comfort of her previous location. During 1422, during his campaign in France during the 100 Years' War, Henry V would fall in, most likely with dysentery. Before his death, Henry would order the release of Joan and the restoration of her property and estates. Joan would live out a quiet life after her release and would die at her home in Havering Abbey Bower in Essex in 1437 at the age of around 68 to 69. She would be buried next to her second husband, Henry IV, in Canterbury Cathedral, where the effigy on her tomb can still be seen today.